We're going to be recording this session and we're going to be posting this session on our webpage, both on DTSC and board. So I see a comment already here. So I'm going to, if we can hold the comments online, and I will go into the room. So here you go. And if you want to state your name and affiliation, just for the record too.
Ingrid Brostrom, the UC Merced Community and Labor Center. I have a number of comments, but I'll just cover the first couple and then see if, let others speak. The first thing I wanted to say is I do appreciate the inclusion of the principles of EJ as a guiding document for the EJAC. However, the description of the principles of EJ, which really focus on fair treatment and access, don't actually reflect what the EJ principles are. So I think the sentence that was included, that actually more closely aligns with the state definition of environmental justice, whereas the EJ principles are much broader and really focus on more than a process and inclusion, but really are outcome focused. So I agree that we should use the principles of EJ, but also let's make sure that we are characterizing them correctly, and also focus on the outcomes of those principles. And another, I think, big overarching concern as I dug a little deeper into the language today is simply the number of duties that we're putting on the EJAC. And there seems to be kind of throwing everything at this body. So I counted, more than a dozen different things that the EJAC is expected to do, both public facing. So we're asking them to conduct and facilitate public meetings, workshops, public stakeholder meetings, trainings for communities, presentations to communities, work group meetings, outreach and engagement to the public on EJ matters related to EJ. So those are all, that's a lot. And that's in addition to all the internal. So also establishing strategies and identifying best practices on equity issues, environmental justice issues, health disparities, hazardous waste management, cleanup in vulnerable communities, cumulative impacts. And in addition to that, we're also asking this body to establish measurable goals and outcomes, develop their own governing structure and develop a work plan, and then also disseminate information from all of these activities they're doing to the Board of Environmental Safety. So, and then we're also saying that we only need 5 people to do this. So, if we're asking for all of this, we need a much larger body. And we also should figure out, is this a public facing body, or is this really meant to be a body that is really developing and IDing things, to hold DTSC and the Board of Environmental Safety accountable and disseminate that information? Right now, it's both. And I just want to make sure, to me, this seems like a full-time job. And by relying on, I know there will be funding available to folks, but just having that much on people's plates either is setting up the board or the council to fail and not meet those objectives, or people are going to be spending an astronomical amount of time. And so I think we need to focus in a little bit on what it is exactly that this board is going to do, where is it best positioned, and really narrow that a little bit. I'll pause there because I have a lot of other things, but I'll see if anyone else wants to comment.
Thank you, Ingrid. And with that, do we have anybody online? Liz, do you want to? I do see Eric.
Eric Nolan. Yeah, you could just ask them to unmute.
Right. Can you hear me now? This is Eric Nolan.
Yes, please.
Great.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Eric Nolan. I'm with Stewarding Design LLC and general member of the community at the public in California. And I certainly understand what Ingrid just said. I think she made some really good observations as to the amount of work that this body may be taking on if we follow the guiding principles and the work that's described. So I think we do need to look at a couple of things. Do we need to look at narrowing what this body does? I will say that one of my biggest concerns is that this body becomes just another listening post where we don't really see action taking place, but people are listening a lot and showing a lot of compassion and feeling your pain, and then taking that information to the board and to DCSC, and really nothing gets done. Now, based upon the structure of the membership, I don't think that will be the case, because I think you're looking at people who are heavily involved in the community who will be members of this committee. And I think that's a good thing. But again, as Ingrid said, we don't want to overburden these folks. So do we need to, as Ingrid said, do we need to be more community facing, or does the committee need to be more back facing towards DTSC and the board, providing input to that board? I would lean towards being community facing. I think this needs to be an action oriented committee. I think it needs to bring change to the community. It needs to find ways to collaborate with NGOs and others that, obviously advise back to DTSC and the board, but take that information and go forward and make some real difference. Because otherwise it's just another committee listening to comments from folks. And if folks don't see action, then there'll be a lot more concern about, well, here we go again. We've got a lot of people listening to us, but no one really doing anything. So I think it'll be important to really narrow down what this committee has the capability to accomplish. And again, I want to echo what Ingrid said.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. Okay. I see a couple hands raised. So if you want, Liz, there's another hand raised in the room. So let me take the in-person and then we go back to virtual. Is that okay? Okay. So if you can, again, state your name, affiliation.
This is Miguel Alatorre with Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice. And I think that I'm going to agree with my coworkers in here. And this sounds like the BES part 2. And so we've already asked the BES what they can do in terms of oversight. We've asked them to shut dumps down and we don't get a straight answer. And so this just seems like it's going to be redundant, this whole EJAC thing. And it's really vague as to what exactly the power of the EJAC would hold. Because as you read through it, it just says, determine how to best share research, recommendations, and activities. But where's the follow through and accountability for who has to take these recommendations and activities and put them into practice? Because if it's going to be like the VS again, where we ask things and, they have to refer it out, or there's these really big, long, drawn out time frames. And I think that this is just another box checking method to include us, but not really include us. So that's what I had to say about that.
Thank you, Miguel, for that. With that, I do see a couple hands raised. So Liz, do you want to call on the next speaker?
Amber?
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber. I am a researcher at Communities for a Better Environment in Huntington Park. I definitely echo everything that's been said so far. Y'all beat me to it. I do want to add a few more points, because if you're putting the ages, for member selection, ages from 15 to 25, as long as you're 15, yeah, it's a lot of work for like a 15-year-old, right? Like, what's going to happen to their work schedule? Like, are they still going to go to school? Do they need permission? Are parents going to be involved? How would that look like? What type of support are these folks going to get? Especially folks who don't have training on how to be, an EJAC, like I don't even know. So I'm just curious how that would look like. I also am curious is there a plan to include residents who are monolingual? There's a lot of folks who, they just speak Spanish, and I know they definitely are very involved in this work and they want to, do more for their community. So I'm just worried. I'm just not worried, but like just wondering if there's, ensuring access to monolingual folks. And another thing I wanted to mention is there should be, I'm sure this has been highlighted, hopefully, the no business or industry reps should be on EJAC. If we are referring to the principles of EJ, it doesn't make sense, nor is it ethical to have someone from industry, especially if they work in like hazardous waste or part of, destructive operations that obviously impact public health. Like, we should not have that. We should emphasize that. And my last question, this is kind of similar to what folks have been saying, like, how does power look like in this position? Like, how is there a decision-making power? it says no purpose is to provide advice, consultation, or recommendations, but what about implementation and force accountability? You know, we're curious, like, is this just, you know, like an office, or what kind of actions are there going to be happening? That's all I have at the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amber. If you want, I don't have anybody in the room in person. Oh, wait, never mind, Liz. Okay, so if you want, we will take another individual, Liz. So if you want to call on the next person, then I can call the individual in person here. I think it's Grecia. Okay.
Grecia Orozco.
Hi, good afternoon. Is the mic working?
Yes, we can hear you, Grecia.
Great. My name is Grecia Orozco with the Center on Race, Poverty, and Environment. I'd like to thank DTSC for hosting this workshop and taking public comments on the EJAC. I just have a few points to echo a lot of what has already been said. First, I would recommend maybe highlighting additional ways for the EJAC to have some enforcement mechanisms in the decisions that they are making, any research or recommendations that they should have. There should be something in this framework that allows them to implement those recommendations with BES and DTSC. And second, I'm seeing that the budget for this EJAC development is $2 million for reimbursing EJAC members, time, travel, as well as all the work that has been discussed today at this workshop, which is quite a lot. I'm afraid that this allocation is not enough to compensate the people that will be making up this group for all that time, for all the work that they're doing. So it kind of goes back to maybe honing in on what specific work the EJAC will be doing, providing more resources than the $2 million that would go to training to assist residents that should have their voices heard in this organization or in this group. But I am concerned that this amount of funding is simply not enough to be able to compensate for the amount of work and time that it would take. And expanding the group, the EJAC, to more than 5 members to be able to accomplish what the goal has been set out to be. Thank you.
Is there a number that you would suggest? I think we're all in agreement that 5 isn't enough. But 25 as I mentioned during the presentation is what's limited within the trailer bill. What do you personally think or lean toward?
I mean, I would be more than happy to provide a more thorough comment, a written comment before the comment period. But what I am aware of is that you are hoping to represent rural, urban, suburban communities, youth, monolingual, hopefully residents to be included. So definitely more than 5. And there's just so many rural communities, so many urban communities. You have the Bay Area, you have Los Angeles, you have suburban areas in the San Joaquin Valley. Like, I can definitely provide a more thorough written comment, but I do want to emphasize that if 5 is the number that it's set for, that funding should definitely increase from more than 2 million.
No, it's definitely not, but that the number would really be helpful, at least just from some of the talks we've internally had and some of the meetings we've had with folks from different communities is really trying to see kind of what works, what's too much, what's 5 is definitely too little. But yeah, thank you so much. We'll look forward to your letter. Deanna,
I think Ingresia wants to unmute herself. I think she accidentally muted herself.
Yeah, so definitely. I'm so sorry. I have a lot of noise going on around my neighborhood, but at least maybe if I had to guess, maybe 15 would be comprehensive, or around that number, just to be inclusive of everyone that you hope to have on the EJAC.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Garcia. And I think going into the order, we definitely heard on the guiding principles, kind of the function, a little bit on the function, obviously member selection. definitely good input. Like Liz mentioned, there's really, at least for us, is the max of 25 just because of budgeting purposes. And really the floor is 5. So, I saw a couple comments from, 10 to 15. It will be really helpful if that's something, I think as we start really looking at the selection criteria, how do we start really looking at, we don't want to box ourselves and say, we're going to get 2 individuals from the Central Valley. But if that's something that the community wants, let us know how we can consider the selection criteria, or we can have a diverse council too. So something to consider too, of any input that you have seen from other memberships that we can model this too. So that will be helpful. Liz, I don't know if you have anybody else online.
Tiana, there is a comment in the chat that I would like to read. It just asks, is any part of their responsibilities include being involved in the appeals process?
Oh, thank you.
And so I don't know if you or Liz would like to speak about, and I know Ingrid brought this up too, how are the priorities decided as to what the EJAC works on?
Yeah, so I definitely, for the permitted appeals, I would love for Liz to talk a little bit about that. But I think as a general, how the priorities are being finalized, that's something that we didn't want to actually have in the document, just because for one, the department has a certain idea, certain ideas of what priorities we want to focus on, but they might be different from what the board has. And also they might be different from what the EJAC overall, when the actual body gets developed and formulated, they might have their own priorities. So I think this is where a discussion of really developing those priorities. And I think the goal is having a discussion with the chair of the board, also the director of the department, and also with the EJAC, and really developing those priorities together. Knowing that there's going to be a time frame, that we're going to be obviously just mindful and seeing what we can actually do within that time frame. Obviously, the goal actually make this body permanent. But absent of us having guaranteed of actually making that body permanent, is what can we do in the time frame that we have? And also is, if the body is going to be continuing after the initial time frame, what are the, kind of some projects or recommendations that we should consider for even after 2025? And that's something that I will invite, honestly, once the committee is formed, is to have those discussions with both the director and the chair. And that was really the thinking behind that. And we didn't want to put any, obviously parameters, just because obviously we wanted to just have that conversation first. So I don't know, Liz, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And like I said earlier, we actually had things like providing feedback on different aspects of what the on what the board of environmental safety has to go through, and ideally this body would have been created alongside the board, because we've, as some of we have been going through we redid the permit appeals process, and I feel like, speaking for myself, I would have preferred to have had more input, more direct communication with folks from the community through the EJAC. But, seeing as to where we are, hopefully this will be something that the EJAC will consider giving us feedbacks on the permit appeals process. And like Tiana said, hopefully this is something that can be further discussed during the work plan implementation part of this process.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And I can see myself in the screen. With that, I'm going to go into the room. There's another question from Ingrid, so I'll pass on the mic.
Ingrid with the UC Merced Community Labor Center. So another couple of things. One, you kind of mentioned it before, but removing the sunset date, and I understand this is constrained by fiscal and the budget. I think I mentioned before that at the very least we should take it out of the guidelines. And I'm just going to say that if this is not a permanent body, it will have limited use, and we will definitely need to be very much more strategic on what can be achieved. But having by the time we get this body up and running, we may have a year and a half tops to get something meaningful done. And that's simply just not enough time, obviously, to take on the amount of work that's outlined in the current guidelines. But even it's questionable what we can achieve at all with such a short amount of time. And so I think we need to work very hard to remove that sunset date and make sure that this is a permanent body. Next, there's a section in here that talks about EJAC will determine how to interact with DTSC leadership. And I think we might need to have something also in the guidance about how DTSC leadership will abide by those decisions. EJAC can make whatever decisions it wants, and without a lot of teeth, it can be disregarded. And so I think having some language in there about, how DTSC commits to being responsive to EJAC is going to be very important. Additionally, there are some also adding something about DTSC obligations to EJAC. So beyond just the interactions back and forth, what are the obligations generally, as well as the board of the BES? So this has got to be a two-way street. This cannot be extractive of the folks that are going to be on this committee. And so, I think both the board and DTSC has to meet this committee halfway, and that should all be spelled out in the guidelines. An example would be, if the EJAC develops comments or recommendations, can there be a commitment to respond to those in writing or at a hearing, a public hearing? So things like that, where it can be very clear that these, the work is not going to go into thin air. And then, there's a lot of, I do appreciate in the guidelines that there's a lot of flexibility for the EJAC to develop its own framework. However, later in the document, there's a section that talks about the focus areas and deliverables shall be determined by DTSC, the BES chair, and the EJAC chair. So to me, that's kind of antithetical to this idea of really giving this freedom, and if DTSC and the board ultimately are deciding what the deliverables are going to be for EJAC, it kind of undoes the flexibility that we see throughout the rest of the document. And again, having only the EJAC chair be able to determine those deliverables, I think that's a misstep too, is obviously the EJAC as a whole should have a lot of say in what work it's going to be doing. And then the final thing, one more thing. One thing I think we should put in there is a conflict of interest statement. Is everyone's a resident of California, and that doesn't mean that they don't have undue ties or influence with the regulated community. And so, I think we really want this to be a place really for impacted residents. People really focus on environmental justice to be serving. And so if we get folks that, have an interest in a hazardous waste facility, for example, they may live in an impacted community, but there's going to be some ties there that is going to, cloud their assessment of things. So I think we should add something in the guidelines about a conflict of interest and financial ties to the regulated entities. And then finally, I didn't see it in the guidelines, but the pay structure, generally we have the $2 million. If we're asking, people to spend their time on this, and we're also asking them to do a lot of paperwork, that's going to be incredibly burdensome, especially if there's lots of meetings. And so, how can we make sure that, whatever pay structure is developed, that we avoid difficult paperwork, that we make it as easy as possible, that we're not asking people to fill out forms in order to get reimbursed, because frankly, what happens is some people don't fill it out. And that would be a really big disservice to folks that spend a lot of time doing this. So I think really having a streamlined and easy way to make sure that we're paying people that serve on this body. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. And I do see Eric. No, next. If you want to go ahead. I think you're muted. Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Again, Eric Nolan with Stewarding Design LLC. And I want to make this set of comments, and I'll keep them as brief as I can, but I just want to start this set of comments with a very positive point. And I think that I'm very pleased with what the board and DTSC are trying to accomplish here. I think this is a great idea. I think the intent is fantastic. I think it's so important that our communities have some point where they have some real deep way to speak to the agency and to the board and to bring about ideas and generate solutions, because that's really what we need. We need solutions for our communities. And so I think the intent behind this is very good, but I think Ingrid's done a fantastic job of bringing some very cogent comments to this. So thank you for that, Ingrid. And I think I want to echo the idea around the authority of this group. What kind of actions will this group be able to perform, or will they be able to oversee to make sure that things are brought to completion, that DTSC is doing what they're intended to do? I don't know if they would have a lot of legal authority when it comes to the appeals process, but maybe they would. Maybe there's some way to be involved there. But I think I get concerned about the authority side of this, because I think there's a danger here of perception that the communities out there could start to see this group as just a buffer between them and the board and between DTSC. So now we've got these community members who are a member of this EJAC, and now we go to them to speak, and it just kind of sort of filters through there, and it's a soft buffer. So we really don't have that direct connection to the board any longer. So there's a danger of a perception there, and I think that needs to be considered when we start talking about what this group can actually accomplish and bring about change. And then one other comment I have, I've mentioned this before in board meetings. I think that there needs to be a function in this committee that is a liaison with other EJ committees that are represented within Cal EPA or other organizations that are involved in environmental issues. This is, there's such a cumulative aspect to environmental justice that it's not just a hazardous waste issue. It's a surface water issue. It's a coastal issue. It's a pesticides issue. It's a air quality issue. So there are a lot of things going on here, and I think there needs to be some coordination between the environmental justice committees that are out there, so we can really talk on a much more global scale as to how we really bring about solutions to communities, more cumulative solutions rather than singular approach. So that's a comment I've had before, and I'm pleased to be able to bring that again. So, but again, we do appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for this time. Thank you for allowing us to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think it will be helpful for individuals. I think for at least there was a lot of research that was done just to really see what other models, specifically Environmental Justice Advisory Committee or councils, were already out there. And the ones that we see, at least within Cal EPA specifically, are the ones on the CARB with the California Air Resource Board. They have their EJAC, and it was really the premise out of AB 32, which is a lot of the scoping plan, obviously, work. But, that's one of the advisories I'm aware of. Another one is at the Water Board, specifically that came out of SB 200, which was really providing safe, affordable drinking water to vulnerable communities throughout the state. I'm not sure if there has been other committees. We'll love to actually get a sense from folks if you guys know of more environmental justice committees that we can see, specifically within EPA, if not within EPA, and other agencies like Natural Resources, or even outside of Natural Resources Agency. I think that will help us kind of guide us on how we can actually, to your point, Eric, how do we have, again, I think being mindful of commitments, but how do we guide this advisory committee to say, hey, here's another set of resources and other committees that you can actually call onto if you need to, right? So I really appreciate that idea. But if the community, if other individuals have any other committees that we're not aware, please share that information with us too. With that, Liz, do you want to go? I think our next caller.
We have Amber from TBE. I'm asking you to unmute.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you. Yes, this is Amber from Communities for a Better Environment. So when I was reading the part of member selection, it says it's appointed by, it's going to be 3 EJ members, 2 DTSC staff, and 2 board of the BS members. But I'm just curious, like, who exactly will these DTSC staff will be? Are they going to be folks who have experience with environmental justice issues? I can only speak to because I'm here in near Exide, but community members, they're very aware of who isn't responsive to their concerns and who never answer their questions regarding, just general like health and public health issues and like what's the next steps about cleanups and so on and so forth. I think there should be an announcement of who are these 2 members of DTSC that will be making the selection. And then, kind of look at their own experience and record of engaging with EJ communities. It's just more for transparency purposes as well. Yeah, so I'm just curious if there's like a plan for that, like who's going to choose? Are these folks who volunteer? And who's going to check their record? How they engage with EJ communities. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you, Amber. Really, really good question. And definitely appreciate that. And I think this is something that I think if there's any ideas of selection, at least for us, we just actually were able to have a new office or deputy director of the Office of Environmental Equity who oversees the environmental justice and tribal components, at least within the department. Her name is Sterling Grant, and I think she should be online with us. But, this is somebody that, at least for me, I will naturally think will be a part of one of the selections because she obviously will be working directly with, obviously the EJAC, but also she'll be directly working with the board and also the director on environmental justice and tribal issues. Again, naturally because of the function, but again, if it's like, hey, this is not a person that I don't feel it's equipped because, I just feel that another person is equipped within the department. Those are recommendations that we will love to actually get. Please, happy to share my email. Same thing with Liz and Georgette. If there's anybody that you're like, I had a really good relationship with X, Y, and Z individuals in the department or even within the board. And I will offer this both Georgette and Liz if you guys want to add a little bit, but at least for the department, if there's anybody that you feel will be a good advocate within the selection committee on behalf of the department, we'll love to actually get the names of those individuals personally. That at least on the DTSC side, but I don't know if Georgette and Liz have any additional thoughts regarding the board.
I would just, hi everyone, Georgette Gomez. I'm a board member for the environmental safety. Been working with the development of the draft that you all are looking at. And for BES, right now, the liaisons to the work that this group will be doing is myself and Lisette. We're both come from EJ. I worked on EJ myself for actually my entire life. I currently live in one of the EJ communities in San Diego, Barrio Logan. Used to work with
Georgette, you're like breaking apart.
Yeah. Georgette, we're having a hard time hearing you. Could you maybe turn your video off and see if the audio works better?
Environmental Health Coalition, and now I'm doing work at the border, all impact. Yeah, is this better? Is it better?
Yes.
No?
Better.
Sorry, everyone. I'll try to call in. Okay. No, that's okay. I'm sorry. I've been having some Wi-Fi connectivity, so I apologize. No, it's just saying that I'm part of the board as well as Lisette. We're both come from EJ. We're still connected to the EJ work. I worked my entire life addressing environmental justice, mainly locally and at the state. Worked for a nonprofit organization. I was born and continue to live in one of the EJ communities. And now I work at the border in San Diego, where there's a lot of impacts. So there's a lot of connections. And my commitment really is to address environmental justice through this body and through many other bodies that I'm a part of. So definitely something that extremely committed. And we're both Liz and myself are the reps to connect, be the bridge between the board and hopefully this group, and really create a stronger direct connection to the entire board is our hope through this process once we establish the group. So yes.
Mhm. Thank you, Georgia. And with that, Liz, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
No, I'm good.
You're good. Definitely thank you for that. And then I have Sirlene Grant, who I indicated was newly appointed to the post of Deputy Director for the Office of Environmental Equity. So I'll just have her introduce herself. And, hopefully I did some justice to her introduction, but it's somebody I'm definitely grateful for her to actually come to the department and build with y'all. So Sirlene, do you want to do a quick introduction?
I'll do a quick introduction. Hello, everyone. I am pleased to be in your presence in this meeting. I am Sirlene Grant, and I am in the Bay Area, Northern California Bay Area, and have been working in environmental issues with community basically my entire life. And I most recently had a consultant business that worked with bridging community to those people, entities, organizations, government agencies that were sponsoring projects so that we could find the win, so that we could solve find the mitigations, the solutions, and all of that. So your questions, your comments this evening have been great. I've been taking it all in. I've been listening. I don't have the answers yet. I'm day 4 on the job, but I am glad to hear the comments. And so I hope that the next time that I'm in your presence, I can help have some answers or guide a process to getting those answers. So just want to say good evening and thank you for joining us this evening so that we can hear from you and make this a worthwhile endeavor where you feel your participation is making a difference. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sirlene. And with that, I don't see any questions virtually. Is there any additional comments to the framework? And I know we kind of went through kind of different segments. I think we went into the membership selection. I don't know if there's any additional comments we want to do there, or if we want to just go ahead and just do overall kind of just comments regarding the framework. Do you want to?
And I think I can throw out some questions we had that I feel like we are still kind of up in the air. I mentioned, what's a good number to have? Deanna mentioned that, we were looking at the EJAC with the CARB and how, and heard about how troublesome it was to have, a lot of members. But what is a lot, especially, like how do you balance what is a lot and what is not enough? And another thing I think is also important is the idea of structure. We, as I said during the presentation, we kind of give an example of, a sort of basic structure with like a chair and, they could have a vice chair, secretary. Is that something that is appealing? Is it, should it not have one chair? Should there be 2 co-chairs? What is your experience with boards or bodies that are made that way? Those are some of the things that we would appreciate. I don't know if anybody else that was involved with the framework has any other questions.
Yeah, I think one question that came about is through this conversation was a conflict of interest. How do you ensure there's no conflict of interest of the memberships? And, the only thing that I can think of is just the formation of 617 committees. And that was something that there was a lot of discussions of conflict of interest. So if individuals are familiarized with, at least familiar with the 617 creation of the different, community advisory groups throughout the state through that initiative, specifically was through CARB. we'll love to see if they, how they dealt with a conflict of interest. We can definitely talk to our counterparts at CARB, but we'll love to get a sense if that was enough. Right. So if we need to either model something similar or we have to go beyond a little bit more regarding conflict of interest, because that's something that I know other bodies have, dealt with, but, something that we have to consider at least moving forward. But with that, I don't know.
Deanna, can I just put something out there? This is Georgette again. I would love to maybe, if there's time from Ingrid and others, and I was in and out, so I didn't get to hear all the comments, but I know that before there's been the comments around ensuring that there is, and I think I heard it a little bit today, that the closing the loop and communication between BES and DTSC to EJAC, and making sure that it's not just a body that, does work and gives recommendations and they never really hear back. What would be some ways in which that can look like, the accountability piece? We'd love to hear more on that. So I think it's a fair criticism of the document, at least from my perspective. But I would love to hear how can it be improved.
And I have to say, one idea that came out from one of our one-on-one meetings, and I think it was even from Ingrid, was to have a space at our at the legislative report ends that the board has to have to be able to give the EJAC a space to be able to report to the legislature. How do folks feel about that? Is that enough? Is that something, to push through the EJAC, through the framework? I'd love to hear folks' opinion on that as well.
Okay. No, thank you for that. I don't know if you want to have any thoughts.
I was just going to ask a question, and then I can maybe give my perspective on that last question. One of the questions is, I think we've heard a number of times about the sunset date of 2025, and I guess this is a question: is has DTSC looked into providing budget requests for this body moving forward? Where are we for the July budget? We heard at the beginning that we should be hearing this weekend for the new budget for DTSC being adopted, but anything relevant to that. So just a question about the funding. I hope people have heard loud and clear that we would expect that DTSC to put in for a continued appropriation for this body. And then, I got a chance to relook at SB 158 today. And so, there's a number of accountability tools in that for particularly around BES that I think we could connect to the EJAC. So one is there's supposed to be an annual report to the policy committee in the legislature. So I think that is one area. There's also a performance report. So basically BES is asked to evaluate both the director and the department on performance. So this is another area that we can use. And then of course there's the performance metrics where, BES is going to be setting these hopefully, soon. Obviously I've asserted that we really need to have a community input into those performance metrics, but the EJAC can play a very critical role in both the setting of those performance metrics if there's time, but also tracking performance metrics over time. So, rather than the BES kind of flying blind, the people on the EJAC are going to be kind of close to the action and seeing whether DTSC is improving or not in certain areas. And so there could be a performance metrics tracking where there's a formal report or informal report or however, really looking at, the performance metrics and whether DTSC is meeting them or not. So those are just some ideas.
Thank you. And with that, I see Eric who has his hand raised. So do you want to go ahead, Eric?
I will. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, Eric Nolan again with Stewarding Design. This is a great question, and I'm glad Board Member Georgette brought this up. That we're saying a lot of things what we think should happen, but in reality, what are the tactics behind it, right? How does this really work, and how do we make it transparent? So, I agree with Ingrid. I think those are very good comments. I'm following Ingrid again, but I think also transparency is going to be critical. I think that if there's some way that we can establish almost a project management sort of procedure to issues that come up from the public that are brought to the EJAC. That if it's something that triggers some sort of action that requires monitoring or requires action, then we set up something like and I keep saying we, I don't know why I say we, but the group sets up something like a Gantt chart and puts it on the website. So it's public facing, the public can look at it, see what the status is. Maybe it doesn't have to be a Gantt chart, but just a timeline of some sort saying these are the steps we've taken so far to address this issue that was brought up to the community. And that way the community can go and look at any time, and that way they get that feedback direct from the website if they need, if they're not getting communication quickly enough. So I think that, getting down into the weeds of it and the actual management of this process makes it transparent and makes it more procedural will help a lot in making sure that things get done.
No, thank you for that. And then I see Lupe.
Yes, hi. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lupe Martinez. I'm with the Delano Gardens in Delano. And we've, somebody who has worked with these agencies for a long, long time also, and seeing or feeling at this point, I guess myself, that we're looking at another group that we think is going to take care or deal with the lack of enforcement, the lack of all the other things that the agencies or DTSC has not done. How are we going to convince our community that with one more group, the EJAC group, is going to change those things that have gone forever, years in these communities? In Delano, it's taken us over 10 years to deal with a plume, and we're finally made some headway. But after 10 years, some folks have spent their lives with different, groups, different buffers, different things, thinking that we're going to get something different. I guess my question is, why do we think this is going to be different now? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that, Lupe. I think and I will definitely welcome Liz or Georgia if y'all have any additional comments. At least on my end, it's something that can say, we understand that the EJAC is not going to solve all the problems that the department has been obviously a part of. And I think, at least for me, it's more of a space of, as we start looking at those structures and programmatic and fiscal structures, what are the things that we can actually start making that can be actually a permanent solution? So at least we don't actually go and do the same wrongs that we have done in the last, 30 something years since the apartment's, inception. And there was a lot of things that, we can go and start really thinking about, programmatically how permits are being delivered, what conditions within the permits, at least on the permitting side, on the cleanup, how cleanups have been conducted, the lack of either engagement that some of these cleanups have, either experienced based on community perspective. And this is what I have personally been hearing from community. But I think it's, how do we start really thinking about, how do we start building structures that are putting community first? Again, it's not going to be solutions that are going to come right away. But I think one of the things that came out of the reform efforts and really looking at the programmatic governance and fiscal reforms of the department, it was really how do we provide a space for community to actually be in the front lines of really looking at this change and providing input as we start really implementing some of these reform efforts. Again, it's not going to be something that we're going to see solutions right away because like you mentioned, Lupe, these have been historically 10, 20, 30 years. And I think we're acknowledging that, but I think also acknowledging that not doing nothing is not okay. I think personally, for me, and especially being a part of some of these reform efforts, this is something that folks wanted to see in really establishing the way that the department actually is viewing its work, but also viewing the work along with communities that are being impacted by the work. So that's just kind of my, the department's perspective, but we'll love to hear from Lizette or Georgette if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And thank you, Lupe, for those comments. And I think, as some of us continue fighting for environmental justice, one of the community's frustrations is that, right? The timing and how long things take. And I think as I was listening to you, at least from my perspective as a board member, and as we're shaping this group, one of my intention, I think, Ingrid, that side of it is, BES is short to create metrics to evaluate the agency, right? Can we look at evaluate the cleanup, the timing of cleanups, and are they fast enough? Can those be changed? So I think we are looking at the evaluation aspect through the lens, at least for me, is through the lens of EJ. And hopefully as we develop this body, really is to elevate, I apologize for that, is really is to elevate the impacted voices and how do we ensure that California really justice through DTSC and just utilizing the tools that were set in this bill and reform and try to maximize that as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to make sure that we are incorporating and utilizing this reform through both the board membership, but also the EJAC, right? How do we do that to ensure that it does happen?
For myself as a board member, my hopes for the EJAC are that they truly represent the community. They represent EJ communities throughout the state. And in doing so, that they give that connection to the board and to DTSC and really give the board their, lived experience or even, kind of report to us, what are those communities going through? All of us board members are appointed either by the governor, Senate, or the assembly. And so we might not always, fully represent EJ communities. And I feel like this is a very good opportunity to have that link, to have that connection to these communities who have been impacted by DTSC's work, and to really let us know what is going on the ground, and give people that space. The board itself has a lot of things on our plate, and as some of you know, we're a part-time board. We're not a full-time governing board, but hopefully this will give us that added connection to the communities throughout California. And so I feel like providing that space, at least at our board meetings, can give those communities a guaranteed voice to be heard, to be put on the public record with their concerns.
Mhm. With that, I don't see additional comments or questions. Definitely thank you, Lupe, for that. Given that we are almost at time, but I don't know if there's additional comments or questions that individuals want to give. We went through a couple of the items, obviously purpose, guiding principles, functions, member selection, implementation, also budget and work plan. And I know there was a question regarding the budget of why the 2-year limit. Just to give a clarification, how the money came about was through the $500 million that were initiated to the department through the CVCI initiative, which is the Clean Up Vulnerable Communities initiative, where there was 5 components, and one of those 5 components, additional to those 5 components, it was the allocation to the EJAC. And that money was actually provided a 4-year encumbrance period, which means that you have to at least promise where the money is going to go within those 4 years, not spend it, but promise. And then you have the ability to spend it after the 4, but you have to encumber within those 4. I can say the hopes is within the department and the board, if the EJAC is something that's widely shared by the community who's going to be a part of the EJAC, is the hopes to actually make it permanent. And how we're making it permanent, those are still up for discussions, which typically they go through a budget change proposal. I think the question is that something that the department is going to take initiative, or is that something that the board wants to take initiative? In doing so, then we have to also look at what is a sustainable funding source to be able to make this permanent. And which means is how are we going to be able to actually have a line item that is not going to be a short-term funding allocation, but it's going to be a permanent body. But then the question, I think I heard a couple questions, is $2 million is not enough. The per diem is not enough. We need to be able to actually compensate the board member, the members within the EJAC accordingly, because there's going to be a lot of work. I think we're trying to even figure out, when we start developing this budget change proposal, what is going to be the justification for us to have an allocation that's more than 2 million, and how is those 2, 3, 4 million or whatever the money, and I'm not going to put a money figure, what is that going to pay for? Is that going to pay more staff? Is that going to compensate the members? And if so, how? And I think those are the questions that throughout the next year and a half, or really 2 years at this point, we want to start really unraveling, because then developing the budget change proposal is going to be a little bit easier than trying to say we want to make it permanent. And then I think the question is permanent for what and for whom? So that's why I'm not saying it's off the table. It's definitely on the table. And I think we want to actually figure out what else is needed, what additional staff is needed to support the EJAC, and really what are the purposes, what are the different items and deliverables that the EJAC should be responsible, and how do we pay that? How do we pay attention to the compensation that should go according to that based on workload? Right? Because that's something that we heard when we were having reform conversations, is let's not just have a body for the sake of a body, but also not pay them according to their efforts. So I just want to emphasize that's something that we have had discussions, at least within the department and also the board. I think we want to use, like I mentioned, the next year or so to really start developing a little bit more clarity of what would that look like. Again, Georgette or Liz, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts.
I don't. I just really want to thank everybody for participating tonight and for giving us all these really, really great comments. I really do feel like we have more direction. We didn't mention earlier, but a lot of these suggestions will be posted just for the sake of transparency. We will be posting them, and we will be answering or addressing them online as well.
I would just also extend my gratitude and my apologies at the same time for having some technical difficulties. That you've given us, at least for me, you've given me a lot of
a lot of questions and direction, and I hear you all loud and clear, and how to improve this document as we continue moving forward with additional workshops coming month. I really challenge us to be a little bit more explicit in ideas, just because that also is helpful. I think our intention is to try to make this body as strong as it can be, that we are improving and addressing environmental justice, and how we can do that, at least through this body. The more specific, the better. So I thank you all for putting out and questioning some of the that has in this framework and in the areas that have been highlighted for improvements. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. And I don't see any additional last comments, thoughts in the room. So I think we are at 7:04 or 5 at this point. But I do want to thank both Board Member Luis and Board Member Gomez for your time. And definitely thank you, Serlene, for being here. I know this is something that we're going to be, even though it's your fourth day on the job, this is something that I really feel that, seeing this through is going to be really one of your really pedestals, at least moving forward. And we have a couple additional sessions, like Liz mentioned during her presentation. Our next actually public comment period in person is going to be in Richmond, and that's going to be on July 12th. And then following that, that's going to be in LA on July 18th. We will be sending out additional information on how to attend in person, but also there's going to be a virtual option that we're going to be providing, similar to what we had today. To Liz's point, thank you for that. We're going to be providing the comments that we received and the questions and the thoughts online for individuals to actually see those thoughts. If folks want to add, please do so. And then from there, last day to provide public comment is July 21st. In hopes of actually bringing in those comments, modifying the document, and then from there having a final framework where we can actually go ahead and start looking for the membership for this committee. And, I think I have learned a lot. There's a lot of questions that were really helpful. And specifically really helpful in really thinking about how this is going to be implemented and actualized at this point. So just appreciate everybody's time. And I know it's been a really insightful conversation for me, and really appreciate your time that you took this evening to be with us. So appreciate, and thank you too for UC Merced for allowing us for the space. Appreciate the fact that we were able to find something central, at least in the Central Valley. So with that, I will go ahead and close. And I don't know if there's anything else, at least on the tech side, that we have to do. No? Okay. So I think
sorry, Deanna, I just wanted to thank everybody that helped put the workshop together. I know that there's a lot of folks that that put this all together. So thank you. You all know who you are. So big, thank you for putting this on.
Yeah, no, thank you, Swati. And with that, have a good evening and stay cool. Have a good one. Bye.